Okay, so I mentioned this tractor tire. I had 2 flats in a week. It's been several months ago now. But when they repaired those flats, they did not put ballast fluid back in the tire. And it was just something, you know, because they said that I took them the tire. They're like, well, do you want to wrestle around a 400-pound tire? No. Okay, so they said just you figure out how to put ballast back in it later yourself. I've never done this before, so I've been putting it off. But the problem is now when I try to pick up something heavy with the front end of the tractor, this back corner comes off the ground. You know, the other side still has its ballast fluid. Now I don't know how much volume is in there. But we're gonna put quite a bit in them, and I'm just gonna show you the tricks to the trade here that I've got. This is just a standard valve stem tool to pull the valve core out. She's that little recessed slot there to pull the actual valve core out. And then this little toy here, I got this from a buddy of mine that's a mechanic. He's actually our heavy duty, he's our bus mechanic at school. I just texted him and said, hey man, do you have a solution for this? We don't run ballast in the truck and the bus tires, but he did actually have it just purely by chance. So how this works, this threads onto the valve stem, this threads onto a garden hose. Now we're down here in the south, we rarely ever get a frost, let alone a hard freeze. So I'm not gonna put antifreeze in here, I'm just gonna put just regular old water. So I've stretched the garden hose out here. I'm gonna get this hooked onto the hose. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the core out of the tire. And I just set a brick under there for now, just for something to kind of let it rest on. I don't want that tire to squish down when it goes flat, you know, and then not get as much fluid in it. So I want to keep it up off the ground to where that fluid can really fill it up. I've positioned my valve stem here at about 10 to 11 o'clock. I could probably back up a little bit more, but basically where the valve stem is positioned, I'm going to put that much water in the tire. The way this thing, that's the valve core tool. The way this little hose tool works is you're pumping water in, and then there's a bleed valve right here, okay? See that little check valve in there? There's just a bleed valve. So as you're pushing water in and it starts compressing air, you can open that little valve and let it bleed the air back out past the water. I've never used one of these before, so we're just gonna give it a shot here and see how it goes. So we just pulled our core out. Figured I'd show you guys that if you've never seen the core of a tire, of a valve stem. So just pull that out. And yeah. That's noisy. So just make sure you don't lose this. It's a little bitty thing. Stick it in your pocket or put it in a drawer somewhere safe so you don't lose it. I'm gonna let the air bleed out of this tire until it stops screaming, and then we'll hook the hose onto it. All right, so we got it put on there. And one thing I would definitely recommend is a on-off valve right here. I'm gonna go look for one and see if I can find one to add to it, because otherwise, of course, I'm 100 foot from the spigot, so I had to try to kink this hose up 2 or 3 times to make it stop running. But this has got a double thread on here, so this is kind of like a lock nut, and then this is your main nut. So you thread this on and then thread this up against it. And then see, here's that little bleed valve. So right now it's spraying out water just because it's pumping full of water. But I put a valve in here and shut the valve off and then hit that, it should blow air out up until the water level gets to this point. Once the water level gets to here, then it will put out water and not put out any more air, and you'll be left with an air pocket up here in the top of your tire. So that's how you control how much air you want to, how much water you want to have in the tire, is how you position your valve stem, and then you just fill it with water until you think it's up to that level, and then shut your water off and bleed it back. If it bleeds out water, you were too full. If it bleeds out air, you're good enough. You're where you need to be. So anyway, I guess we're gonna let it run here for a while. So you can hear it. It's jutting water against that inside of the tire there, inside of the tube. I imagine it'll take a little while, so I'm gonna wander off here and go see if I can find that shut-off valve. Like I said, worst case scenario, you overfill it with water. I mean, the water pressure from our well is only 55 psi, so it's not like I'm gonna fill it all the way up and actually rupture the tire. So the worst case is I would fill it all the way completely full, and then I'd have to just disconnect this and let some run back out. So it's not too big of a deal, really. I'm gonna stay here with it and listen to it. I want to get that shut-off valve first. I'm gonna stay here with it. But ultimately, it's not, it's not too risky here. Okay, so I'll show y'all here. I just went and got that little shut-off valve I was talking about. So there, I shut the water off. And we're bleeding air out. Okay? If I turn the water back on and hit that, it sprays out water, obviously, because this is flooded with water. As quick as you shut the water off, it'll balance and bleed air. So that's why I said we're gonna run it like this now. And you don't have to really stop and let that air out at any given time. But we're gonna keep running it like this until we get to a point that we shut the water off and hit this and we get water bleeding back. Then we'll know we're full. Well, my daughter's got the mowing, so you'll have to tolerate that. But I was just gonna show you guys now. So I'll cut my water off here. And you see we're bleeding out water. So we have filled up with water past here. So now I'm just gonna bleed this down until it blows air, and then we'll be done. All right, so I just checked the other tire too, just to make sure, and rolled it around, put the valve stem here about 1 o'clock or 11 o'clock. And as soon as I started trying to pull the valve core out, it started spraying out water. So that one's still full, which I've never gotten a flat with that tire, but I didn't know how full of fluid it was, so I wanted to check it. But I just wanted to give you guys a little rundown summary again on how to use this thing. I have no idea what this tool is actually called. I don't know where you get it. I borrowed it from my buddy, but I'm sure if you just search tire ballast filled hose tool or something like that, you'll find it. So general process: block your tractor up on something, put it up on a jack stand or something, so that when you pull that valve core out and the tire goes flat, it doesn't squish the tire. You don't want to squish that tire down flat and then lose volume that you could have put water in, okay? So block it up, pull your valve core, let the air bleed out, put this onto your hose here, onto you want to have that valve, that shut-off valve on your hose there. So put this onto your valve. This is kind of jammed up right now because I got it tight, but you'll thread this first ring onto the valve stem and then thread this ring up behind it as a lock nut, basically. And then just turn your water on and let it fill. Like I said, if you fill too full, I don't know why I lost focus, but if you occasionally every couple of minutes, maybe shut your water off, bleed the air back just as a check, and then eventually you're going to do that. And when you shut your water off and bleed this back, it's going to spray water out. And when you do that, you know you're full. So then you can just sit there and bleed it back down until it gets to where it wants to push air, and you know that you've got your water level right there at the valve stem. So when you disconnect it and you go to put your valve core back in, it's going to be blowing air out, not violently, but it's going to be blowing air out and probably spitting a little water. But don't worry about it, you're not going to really lose anything significant. Just pull this off, get your valve core back in there, and then air your tire back up to where it wants to be. I put these at about 30 pounds, 30 psi. I don't really know if that's right or not, but if they're a little low, that's okay. It gives me just a little bit more traction. So anyway, neat little tool. I'm happy to finally have my tire filled back up. Hopefully I won't be taking the butt end of the tractor off the ground near as much as I was, so it was definitely needed.